Welcome to Meditation Mount, and thank you for joining us for today's View from the Mount broadcast. I'd like us to be present for each other, and so let's take a few moments to gather our energies, gather our forces, because we are coming in from different parts of the world. We are going to be joining together, creating a field of receptivity, and going on a journey together. So let's start by taking a few deep, gentle breaths to bring ourselves to a point of stillness and inner poise, letting go of any tensions that may be held in our physical body, in our emotions, in our mind. And then with another breath, we enter the silent space of the heart and stand in the presence of love that burns as a fire at the center of our being. And we connect with each other, heart to heart, to heart, to heart. And through these lines of lighted love, we weave together a group chalice, a field of impression, of receptivity, into which new insights can pour. We'll take a few more deep breaths. And then with this awareness, bring yourself back to your waking consciousness. And we'll go on this journey together. So in a world where people are struggling to make ends meet, where many of our fellow citizens are hungry or homeless or living below the poverty line, it might sound somewhat incongruous and fanciful to focus this month's View from the Mount on the theme of abundance and the never-ending search for gold. When I think of abundance, typically it conjures up an image of this vast cornucopia of riches, this basket of plenty that's overflowing with all that we desire and all that we need in life. But the inquiry today, we're not going to be talking about how we amass a surfeit of material possessions. Instead, we're going to be entering into the eternal search for the golden riches of a soul-inspired life. This is what's fueled many lives over many lifetimes, the quest for gold. What is true gold? What is true wealth? And then we're going to explore, why is this treasure always stored and hidden from view? And how do we go about reading the treasure map and discovering its whereabouts? So in preparing for this broadcast, I collected or organized my thoughts and my experiences and understandings that have been accumulated over the past number of years in order to put together a presentation that might stimulate the field. And I was all set to just do a presentation. And then something happened a couple of days ago that changed things for me, and I want to share about that. Here at Meditation Mount, we've got a number of eucalyptus trees on the property, and every year they shed their bark to reveal a new, lighter, smoother skin. And this is an image of some of the eucalyptus trees outside where I live. So I've always found Mother Nature to be an amazingly wise and patient teacher. And over the years, she's shown me her secrets, the secrets of revelation. And she's demonstrated the art of unfolding the inner promise through the rhythms and the cycles of the season. So when I walked around Meditation Mount and noticed that there was bark everywhere because all the trees were shedding and it was windy, and so the whole air and all the ground was filled with these pieces of bark, I was witnessing the shedding of an old bark. And immediately it had me pondering on what it means for you and I to periodically shed our old skin and for a new membrane of sensitivity and awareness to appear. Now, I've seen this before. I've seen the shedding of the eucalyptus bark. It's an annual event. But this time it touched me deeply because I realized that I'm probably due for a release, a letting go, an upgrade. So the question is, the shedding of our interpretations and beliefs about life is actually vital, because otherwise a new understanding may not emerge. So with all processes of renewal and rebirth have to be preceded by death, or the letting go of that which has served us up to now. So when I look at my beliefs, I understand them to be the stories I tell myself about what is real and true. And these stories are approximations and partial representations of the truth as seen through the lens of my current vision. And this vision could be clouded and distorted by illusion and glamour. So my beliefs are not the actual truth. They're my partial understanding of the truth. And so what I'm realizing is the truth can only really be experienced by stripping away all that is limiting and releasing all the stories we have about life, so that we actually stand naked in front of life. And instead of having a belief about life, we enter into a direct lived experience of life. You bypass belief and go directly into knowing, direct knowledge, as it's called in the Agni Yoga teachings. So I was pondering this week and basically telling myself, if I don't constantly shed and grow new skin, the danger is that I'll be stuck in an old story that has its limitations. So as I've just said, being alive and engaging wholeheartedly in life in the moment, and then possibly sharing our field notes of this experience with others, is very different from having a belief, being stuck in the past, and functioning, if you were a teacher giving a presentation, functioning simply as a spiritual encyclopedia. And there's no life in it. It isn't a lived experience. It isn't embodied wisdom. And Roberto Assagioli, Dr. Assagioli, who's the founder of the whole creative meditation movement and the inspiration behind Meditation Mount, developed a spiritual psychology called psychosynthesis. And part of that is going through a disidentification exercise. You disidentify with what you currently understand to be who you are, because we're so much more than how we're currently behaving. We're so much more than how we see ourselves to be. So you have to let go and disidentify in order to gain a greater identification. This is the process of renewal. So it's this never-ending search that we're on, this pilgrimage in life, requires that I, and possibly all of us, shed our old skins. So today, some of what I'll be sharing is the wisdom and understanding from the old bark. And so I'll be presenting that because that still is valid. But also there are some new insights that are coming through as a result of growing a new skin. So I'd like to, at the end of the presentation, return to this idea of shedding the old, growing the new, a new sensitivity. So let me begin with where the quest for gold started for me. As you hear, I was born in England, and I was born in England in the tradition of all the stories of the Knights of King Arthur. And so I was very used to reading adventure stories. So the actual story began, this mythical search for gold, at an early age. I was curled up in the armchair next to the fireplace, reading tales of adventure and fairy stories. And I loved this. It really spoke to something in my heart. So this timeless recounting of valor and daring sort of called to a deep and dormant place inside my young heart. And it spoke to a life of endless adventure, of endless searching, of leaving home and going out and looking for the riches, going out into the world and searching for gold. And I remember some of my favorite stories were those in which, if you like, a young villager innocently set out in search of fame and fortune in far-off lands, and invariably stumbled upon a cave in which lay priceless gems and piles of gold. We've all read the stories, we've seen the movies, because these piles of gold and priceless gems are guarded. The mouth of the cave is normally guarded by a fierce and fiery dragon. So this ancient beast was the appointed keeper of the entrance. And the only way to reach the treasure was to answer 3 riddles posed by the dragon. You had to answer them correctly to prove that you weren't being tricked by what I would call the soporific allure of the language of its fire drake tongue. It had a mystical, magical way of sort of putting you to sleep, and you had to get through that and answer the questions. So the hero had to prove that they could see through the mists of illusion and glamour, and that they possessed the required power of heart and mind to break the spell of temptation, because the temptation is promising the false riches if we only become subjugated to the dragon of our lower nature. And it was only later on, when I was studying psychology, that I understood that all the fairy stories and all these tales of adventure that I've been reading, they all employed archetypal patterns of human nature to weave their spells. And so these childhood tales were, in fact, my early encounters with the stories for the search for identity, the meaning that the individual seeks on the quest, the wandering in the dark and temporal passages of earth to find the gold, to find the soul. And I realized that the dragon represented the coarse, elemental nature of my personality that had to be faced and then embraced and then refined before the treasure of the soul was accessible. So the tests and temptations of the cave entrance that stood between poverty and riches were actually specifically designed to test the worthiness and readiness of the individual to own the treasure within, the inner gold. So to possess the gold that is in the cave, we have to earn the right to pass by the ancient dweller on the threshold. And in this case, it's represented by the dragon. And once you cross the threshold, you enter into the inner sanctum, where the treasure is housed and safeguarded from plunderers, i.e. people who are not wise enough, who are not evolved enough to lay claim to the treasure. So this brings me to Carl Jung, because when I was studying Jung, Jung describes the human archetypes. And he, in one of his books, his many books, he actually wrote about alchemy. He was fascinated by alchemy because the whole process of the evolution and transformation of consciousness is an alchemical process. And so he referred in one of the books to the alchemists of the Middle Ages, whose sole focus was to create gold out of the base metals, out of the lead, through a process of sublime transformation. So this was a different kind of quest. The alchemist's quest was finding the philosopher's stone that can transform lead into gold. So what is that magical property that can change the base elements into the highest gold? And this was described as a mystical process of the transubstantiation of matter into its highest and purest form. That's one way of describing what happens in the alchemical process. You are refining all the coarse matter and bring it up to its purest and highest vibration, which is gold. And that's analogous to refining the coarse elements of our nature and then raising them up to the frequency so we gain access to that space in which our soul resides, which is the true gold. So this was sort of a real welcome eye-opener because what I found when I looked through what Jung had to say about the archetypes, it directed me immediately back to all the tales and adventures that had captured me as a youth, as a young person. So as we said, the gold obtained by the alchemist is synonymous with the liberated soul. And so the alchemical laboratory today is not just found inside the crucible, inside this laboratory. The laboratory that we go through the process now is daily life. And all the elements of the people we meet, the encounters, the meeting with ourselves, the meeting with our unredeemed aspects, the meeting with our shadow. So we are part of an alchemical process of changing the lead, the base elements of our life, into gold. And when you understand that, you realize that every encounter is an opportunity to raise the frequency of how you're showing up in the world. And you can look at this quest for gold because it's sprinkled throughout history. One way you could look at it is the quest for gold is seen in the Olympic movement, where athletes from all around the world compete to be the best and to bring home the gold. That's the whole thing, bring home the gold. And it's no accident that the Olympics refer to Mount Olympus, because this was, as the Greeks proclaimed it, the home of the gods. So today's search for Olympic gold is a distant echo of the quest to scale the heights of Olympus. But nevertheless, it's part of that same inner urge that's driven individuals to embark upon quests and journeys of self-discovery since the dawn of time. It is our nature to search for the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So I'd like to just put something in here that I'll revisit later. Perhaps the gold we seek is not outside of us. Perhaps the gold we seek is already within us, and it's not an earthly metal or an earthly metal, but represents a higher state of consciousness. This inner gold represents an enlightened state of wisdom and loving kindness that in the scriptures, particularly the Bible, refer to as Solomon's gold. So the wisdom of Solomon is Solomon's gold. And I would say that the wisdom of Solomon is the true spiritual gold standard. So often we look for gold in all the wrong places. So maybe we've been looking as a human species in the wrong places for this legendary Eldorado. So I just mentioned the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's not just a folk tale. I remember growing up, and that was it. You had to, every time there's a rainbow, you try to find the end of it because there was going to be a pot of gold. Those of us who've studied the Ageless Wisdom teaching know that the rainbow represents the rainbow bridge, the Antakarana, the bridge that connects the personality with the soul. And we have to cross it. First of all, we have to build it. And then when we build it, we cross it and we enter the soul, which is a golden state of being. So the pot of gold, really, once again, it's the same as Solomon's gold. It's the wisdom of the soul, because one of the qualities of the soul is loving wisdom. So we have to build the bridge, cross it, and then into this golden state. Also, if you look at Nordic mythology, and I lived in Scandinavia for many years, and so this is something very close to my heart. There was also a rainbow bridge in Nordic mythology. It was called Bifrost, and it was a burning bridge, and it connected Earth, which was called Midgård, and Midgård really translates to Middle Earth, and it connected Midgård or Middle Earth to Asgård, the home of the Asa, the gods. But only the gods could cross the bridge. Basically, only those that had a higher consciousness could cross the bridge. Mortals and giants were prevented from reaching Asgard by the god Heimdall. So there was this dweller on the threshold. You can't cross until you prove that you're worthy to make the crossing. So that means you have to embody the qualities of the soul to gain entry into the realm of the soul, which we are referred to as the fifth realm or kingdom. And the human realm or kingdom is where we're currently residing. So the rainbow bridge is the connection between the fourth and the fifth realm, between our particular experience and the enlightened experience of living as a fully realized soul. So going back to the Nordic legend, the Nordic legend tells of the destruction of the old world, because it was said that during a great battle, which was called Ragnarök, all the gods and all living things perished. Everything just came down. So led by Loki, the monsters fought the gods for control. It was a battle between light and dark, sort of what's going on now. And as a result of this battle, Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, was shattered by the weight of the monsters. I mean, is this just a fanciful story? I don't think so, because what it refers to is this ancient understanding of the destruction of Atlantis, where there was this tug of war between the forces of goodness and the forces that were more nefarious and malevolent or selfish, basically selfish. And so it said that Atlantis sank under the weight of its own discretions and sank into the sea. This great tsunami, this great tidal wave went around the world. And what we had is the story of the flood. And this is where the Old Testament picks up the story of the great flood, and then Noah and the ark, and then finding the new land. So what I want to put forward is that this quest for gold and this battle to earn the right to the gold, and the battle in our own nature to redeem the elemental, coarse aspects of ourselves into a more refined state of being, has been with us throughout this whole journey. So I do believe that the Nordic mythology and the story of the flood in the Bible really talk about the sinking of Atlantis. And then after the flood, then we had the Egyptian civilizations and the rebuilding of some of the wisdom that was carried from Atlantis, portrayed in the building of the pyramids. So I know I'm straying into territory that some people may feel is fanciful and not true, but for me it rings true. And I believe we're at another turn of the spiral now. We are in those latter days that Atlantis faced, where it had great power. It had accessed a lot of power, but it didn't have the moral and ethical fiber or grounding to wield that power with wisdom. It was destroying itself. Not only was it destroying itself, it was destroying the planet. And the planet basically said, enough. And I sincerely hope that we can wake up in time to stop the inevitable destruction at our own hands of this beloved planet. So the quest for gold isn't just me trying to find gold. It's us raising everything to a new level. And that's, I believe, what we're facing now. So I would say that our soul is ever waging a campaign. I sense my soul is always urging me onwards and upwards along this path of self-discovery and fulfillment. For some people, this search becomes, if you like, a desperate search for fame and fortune. And I know a few years ago, I was behind a car with a particular bumper sticker on it, and it said, "Whoever dies with the most toys wins." And I thought, well, that's humorous. And I realized, no, that actually is a meme. That's a thought form that's driving many people. So the quest for gold, for many people, is a quest for physical gold, not the gold of the soul. So let me tell you a story that helped me deepen my understanding of this. Back in May of 2001, a colleague and I were invited to facilitate a 5-day conference on true wealth in India. And this conference brought together spiritual groups, business groups, social workers. And we met in Dharamsala in the northwest of India, in the foothills of the Himalayas. It's where the Dalai Lama resides. And in fact, the highlight of the gathering was a 2-hour audience with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, inside his residence. So we all gathered there. And he was this most humble and jovial person, very unassuming, wonderful, wonderful spirit. We wanted to ask him, what do you understand about true wealth? What is true wealth? Because that was the theme of our conference. And so he introduced his understanding very simply. He said, the quest for worldly wealth, there is a definite limit to what we need. It's determined by our true needs, not by our greed. And then he said, however, in the search for spiritual wealth, it was a limitless journey. And we should accumulate as much of this inner treasure as possible, because once we have this inner treasure, we're more wise, we're more loving, and we can share it as a blessing to our world. So it was very simple. There is a limit to how much you need on the material level, but there's no limit to the wisdom and the love and the kindness and all the other qualities of the gold of the soul that we can then dispense to a world in need. So basically what the Dalai Lama was saying, that when you find the treasure, don't use it for the aggrandizement of the self or personal satisfaction. It's there for the serving of the common good. It is our common wealth. So when I access wisdom, when I access love, it's not just for me. I've accessed a common resource, a community resource. And now I have the responsibility of distributing the resources. So all of us have a commonwealth of resources from which to give to our world. And I believe more people actually seeing through the hollow message of materialism and beginning to discover that no amount of money or fame can ever satiate the deep inner hunger that we feel in the human soul occasionally. So in the biblical sense, there's a phrase that says we cannot live by bread alone. And by bread, it means the physical plane, physical matter. We can't sustain ourselves simply by eating physical food, acquiring material things. We need to have soul food. And soul food is generated by the soul. And the soul food is loving kindness. Soul food is wisdom. The soul food is compassion. These are deeply nurturing qualities, not just for ourselves, but for all that occupy the same space, are part of the same family. So the question I pose to myself and to you now is, how rich and fulfilled do you and I feel right now? How rich do you feel when you're empty, when you're impoverished, when you believe you've got nothing to give? So here's something that I discovered a number of years ago. A friend of mine pointed it out. In fact, he said, look, when you've got nothing, that's the time to give. Because when you've got nothing, or when you believe you've got nothing, you've cut yourself off from the circulation, this life-giving circulation of the one life in which we live and move and have our being. So by giving, you plug yourself back in. Other people think, no, I can't give. I've got to hold on to the little I have. But his point was, when you give, you re-energize, you regenerate, you reconnect, and then more can flow. Because we're told in the scriptures, by giving, we reconnect with the fullness of life. In fact, it's in giving that we receive. So I want to take this back, this never-ending search for gold, to personal relationships. About life is often referred to as a give and take. You know, like, I can give you, but I also need to take. I've experienced this not to be a true relationship with life. This is more of a transactional relationship with life. And it's sort of played out inside my understanding of what's fair. And it's rooted in this transactional relationship that says, look, I can only give to you after you've given to me. How can I give to you if I don't have anything from you? It's transactional. You scratch my back, I'll scratch your back, whatever. So what I've discovered recently, and it really came home to me, that life is not a give and take. Life is a give and give. For in the giving you receive. If I give and give, then I open myself to receive the fullness of life. I mean, if you don't believe me, test it out. I know the temptation for me is anytime I feel that I don't have anything, I tend to fall back into taking mode. Oh, I need that, I'll go take it. But in a situation, if I give some compassion or just give some kindness, say a kind word to somebody, that's giving. And I find it changes everything. And somehow riches seem to flow. Whereas if I withhold, if I'm miserly in sharing my life and my heart with other people, I cut off the circulation. So it seems that the secret to abundance is choosing to give from the goodness of our hearts to each other. I mean, what a novel concept. It's like, is it that simple? Well, at one level, it is that simple. But at the moment, we have an economic system that's not based on that principle. No. Supply and demand. The whole economic system that we've got in place, the capitalistic system, is based on some different assumptions. Not saying they're good or bad, but they have their limits. And our present system, based on what it's based on, can never nourish everybody, so everybody's needs are met. There'll always be some who have more than the other. So I've been talking about this on the large scale, but I want to go back to looking at the missing treasure in our relationships with other people. If I say I'm missing something, so I'm going to show a couple of slides now. The first one here, I just want to say that these were created in 1975, so they're a little crude and they may be a little outdated in their language. So, but the message still holds true. So if I look at another person, first of all, if I feel empty inside of me, I got a hole in me, and I see another person who's the same shape as the hole in me, then they're the missing piece. I need them in order to be whole. That's a very different basis for a relationship than if I see another person who's also seeking to grow, and we grow together. So these two current wholes actually make a greater whole. Then I'm not seeing you as something I need to take from. I'm seeing another person in my relationship as somebody who we can build something together where give and give is the rules of the game. So that for me is important, because I don't think two halves make a whole in a relationship. I think two wholes make a greater whole. And as I've mentioned before, I believe the whole secret of evolution of consciousness and the development of life on Earth is a progressive entry into greater states of wholeness. So in a relationship, it's an opportunity to grow in wholeness through and with another person, rather than, hey, they got something I need in order to be whole, I take it and I run off with it. We can only grow in relationship, and relationship has to be something that is mutually beneficial. So it took me many years to come to this realization. And occasionally I may have moments where I forget it, but for me, the motto, the mantra is life is a give and give. That's sort of how I get back on track. The other thing I want to mention about a taking relationship, I don't think we can find the riches we're looking for if we get rich at the expense of others. I'm thinking of blood diamonds. How can we believe that we have these riches, wear diamonds, when they are built on the blood of our sisters and brothers? This image here, once again, it comes from 1975, so it's a rather crude depiction, and even though you get what it means, I was basically saying that there are two spheres, and the North and the South were very distinct at that time. They're not as distinct. There's poverty everywhere, and there's extreme wealth everywhere. So these two hemispheres represent rich and poor. And you can have one aspect of ourselves, because this is the soul of humanity, the incarnated soul speaking, part of it who believes it's successful. I am a very successful international business person. Whereas another part of ourselves is crying out saying, I'm a starving child of Africa. So this is nearly 50 years old, this image. So as I say, excuse the sort of the crudity of the language, but I think the point is still valid, is that we can't have a society where some people are overfed and others are underfed. So I go back to the question that we've raised in some of the podcasts we've done, and we've raised it in other View from the Mounts. The question is, what will make a real and positive difference in the world and help turn things around? Help all of us to be enriched. Help all of us to live a life of abundance. So I'll repeat what we've said before. I sincerely believe there's a tipping point that occurs when the locus of our living shifts from investing energy solely in the what I call the survival of the separated self, egocentric living, and then we make a needed shift of reinvesting our life energy in serving and supporting the common good, serving the whole. That is ecocentric. So I don't believe we can find nourishment, abundance, riches where everyone benefits until we shift from selfishness to serving the good of the whole. I think it's that simple. Then it has to translate into our economic systems. It has to translate into our social systems, our political systems. It has to inform all the ways in which we choose to live together and govern ourselves, which is really what politics is. Politics is how we choose to live together and choose to govern ourselves. So I think for me, taking mode is when I'm in selfish mode. And it may be because I don't know any better and I really am in survival mode and all I can do, all I'm programmed to do is take. But there comes a time when we have to step in to the more mature aspect of who we are, to know that we are a soul and the soul has limitless resources. So without this needed shift from ego to ecocentric, I believe our society is going to continue to behave in a self-centered way. We're going to be these selfish units competing with each other for scarce resources until we realize that the earth is an interdependent sentient system of lives and that each of us is part of this interwoven and benevolent ecosystem, and we can make a real difference. So let me take a breath here. The question is, what if the real truth is that when we give freely to the good of the whole system naturally nurtures its constituent parts? And this is basically what I've just described. What a concept and a working model for establishing a new society. But it means that the old society has to be deconstructed. And many people are invested in maintaining the old structure because they believe they need all the power, they need all the goods. And they've earned the right to do that. And if somebody would just work harder, they'd be richer. I think the shift has to take place. And it's that shift from ego to ecocentric. So I don't believe we're able to build a society where the riches of the soul and the riches of the resources of our common humanity are available to all until we've made this shift. And it reminds me of a saying in the spiritual teachings, to those that give, more is given, so that they may give again. So every time we give, we receive more, not as a reward, but so that we can continue to give. So what we're doing in our giving, we're learning to grow our capacity to be givers, to be nourishers, to be providers, to be enrichers. So I believe this is how we participate in what I've always called the endless chain of being and blessing, like this circulation of life. So the one life circulates this richness. And the richness is that state of being we find when our soul governs our lives. So I believe that the world can be a more just and joyful place. Our society can be based on caring and sharing only when we shift from selfishness to serving the good of the whole. That's a huge step, and that's the one we're in front of now. And we're living in a world of extremes, with extreme weather, extreme politics, extreme everything. And extremes break the patterns of relationship. We have to rebuild our relationships. So what is right relationship with each other? And what is right relationship with the soul? What is right relationship with abundance? So that, if you like, that's what I had put together as far as the presentation from the old bark. So can I return now to the whole ritual of shedding our bark and the casting off of our old skin if I were a snake? And I'd like to explore some things about beliefs and assumptions. So for me, the shedding process calls for a letting go of all beliefs that may be limiting my ability to fully engage with life. So I'm going to show 4 slides now and just read through them with you and ask you, as you hear the words, just to reflect on what does it mean for me. So it says, beliefs are mental models created by what we hold to be true about ourselves, others, and the world around us. They reflect our personal worldview and are the lens through which we take in data from the environment, we draw conclusions, and we respond. We behave and act in accordance with these personal beliefs. We could also consider them to be our personal operating assumptions. Each of us has our own take on life, what we hold to be true about ourselves, others, and the world around us. And this interpretation of reality defines our personal operating assumptions. And these are the reasons we give ourselves and others for why we think and do what we think and do. We each live in different mental worlds. Even though we may occupy the same physical environment, the same physical space, we somehow occupy different mental worlds that may be cut off from each other. So here I go back to what I said at the beginning of the broadcast. Beliefs are not the absolute truth. For me, beliefs are our present interpretation of what is true as viewed through our particular lens, which is in fact influenced and biased by the conditioned field of the psyche and by our level of consciousness. So let's have a look at this, the second image here. So the next one, let's pull that up. Mental models are neither good nor bad. They are simply our present ability to interpret the world around us and to give it meaning. The danger comes, however, when these mental models become fixed points of belief and are not open to change. This point of view or interpretive fixation can lead a person believing that they have the only claim on what is right and true, and that all other points of view are invalid. So if we become fixated, we become fanatical, we become dogmatic. And the danger is that we're right, everyone else is wrong. We've walled ourselves off from each other. So our beliefs can in fact limit our understanding of life and what's possible. And now I'd like to share some examples. So I've said here we can learn a great deal from what was said by people in history who were respected. They were considered experts in their own field as they contemplated the future, as people are now contemplating the future. So I'd like you to listen carefully and reflect on what some of these people have said over the past 100 years when they talked about what was possible and was not possible. Here you'll see beliefs, mental models, personal operating systems hard at work, telling people what is, what isn't, what can be, and what can't be. So here's some great statements. I love these. I think that there is a world market for maybe 5 computers. Thomas Watson, chairman of IBM, 1943. Oh, yeah? Who the hell wants to hear actors talk? Harry Warner, Warner Brothers, 1927. And this is one of my favorites. Everything that can be invented has been invented. Charles Dewey, the commissioner of the US Office of Patents in 1899. And this is one I love because I grew up with the Beatles. I saw them in concert. We don't like their sound, and guitar music is on the way out. Decca Recording Company rejecting the Beatles in 1962. Oh, wow. And this one's another zinger. There's no reason anyone would want a computer in their home. Ken Olsen, president and founder of DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation, 1977. Maybe that's a reason why they're not around much anymore. And then a couple more. This telephone, quote unquote, has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. The device is inherently of no value to us. Western Union Internal Memo, 1876. So all of us are now communicating on smartphones. But this is what somebody who was an expert believed. And because I worked in the aerospace industry for many years, this one was one of my favorites. Lord Kelvin, the president of the Royal Society in London in 1895, declared, heavier than air flying machines are impossible. I mean, classic. And so part of what I did in my time in the corporate world was to help get airplanes off the ground, up in the air, and safely back on the ground. And I think Lord Kelvin was mistaken. So finally, let me wrap up with this last slide here. There's this wonderful Zen saying, in the expert's mind, there are few possibilities. In the beginner's mind, there are many. It basically says that if we believe we know everything, then there's no room for new things to come in. In the beginner's mind, where you're curious, you're inquisitive, you're open, the possibilities are endless, or they're many. So this is by way of distilling what's presenting itself for me as the new skin. I'm seeing things slightly differently. So the art of being fully present and engaged is to live a meditated and not a premeditated life. If I have a premeditated life, I've already predetermined what the future should look like. Now, some of it may be true, but I may be blocking some things I have no idea about, some beauty, some wisdom, something fantastic that is going to come through, that I don't allow it to come through because it can't come through my filter. I've already determined what the future should be and what is possible and not possible. If I live a meditated life, I am living in the moment and allowing that which is knocking at the door to come in. My door is open. So what I'm realizing now, the shedding of the old skin for me is about letting go of beliefs. Beyond beliefs, there awaits a world of direct knowing. The lived experience of being fully present in the moment as life flows freely through us and we flow freely through life without it being filtered and conditioned by previously held beliefs and assumptions. Now, I want to say this, there's nothing wrong with beliefs, it's just they have their limitations. So I believe, just as I felt when I watched the eucalyptus bark just shed and to fill the air here at Meditation Mount, it's healthy to periodically refresh and renew ourselves by letting go of beliefs in the same natural way that the eucalyptus tree annually sheds its bark and the snake casts off its old skin. And I remember when I was in a seminar recently, leading a seminar, and somebody said, I want to be renewed. I want to be reborn. And I said, well, to be reborn, you have to first die. So if you really want to be reborn as quickly as possible, hurry up and die. So for me, I'm saying not so much hurry up and die physically, but hurry up and let go of anything that may be limiting my ability to perceive life on its own terms and not to filter it through my beliefs, although the beliefs are useful in giving meaning to things up to a point. I think we've reached the point where we have to step into a lived experience so that we don't just start preaching at each other and quoting gospel or quoting political text at each other. The way we can do it is invite each other to step into a lived experience of what it means to be human, what it means to live from the heart, what it means to find the gold in the heart and to share it freely with everybody. So I guess I could say in summary that as we liberate ourselves from our mental and emotional blockages and limitations, the presence of a greater love is able to gracefully enter our hearts. And it enters through an open portal. And this open portal allows what the Bible refers to as the life more abundant. So the life more abundant is the true essence of who we are that can only reside in a loving space. It can only reside in the house of the soul. So the life more abundant, the true abundance of living, is when we live a soul-infused life. And the one life can flow through us, not only to nourish ourselves, but through us it nourishes all the constituent parts of this living system that we call our planet. So for me, when I revisit the word abundance, abundance is the natural fruit of joyful giving. And it seems to grow and it flows from inside a light-hearted place of unconditional love. So it goes back to giving and giving. Unconditional love is the ability to give and give. So I see love as the golden radiance of the soul, the gold that burns brightly and constantly at the core of our being. This gold, as we have discovered, is the fire of love. It's this golden fire of love that lives at the heart of who we are. So to go back to our theme, the never-ending search for gold, the gold we seek really, I believe, is loving wisdom. So the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow bridge that takes us to the soul is the gold of loving wisdom. This is the gold we've been searching all along. So that really brings me sort of to a point of closure, but it doesn't end the search. And in fact, it's not a search anymore because it isn't out there. The search for gold now is creating the right conditions where the gold can be revealed, where the soul can show up. If you and I can create a field of loving kindness in our daily relations, then the soul has a place through resonance to show up in its true richness, in its true golden radiance. So that for me is where we find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow bridge. It's when we live together as soul-infused personalities on earth, soul-inspired humans. So I'm going to take a couple of breaths. I've been speaking now for about 50 minutes, and hopefully you've had time to digest and the things that you can reflect on. This is a timeless, endless quest. And for me, it's important not to get stuck anywhere on the journey. And the place where I realize I can get stuck is if I dig my heels in around beliefs. So even though beliefs are necessary stepping stones, if I remain on the stepping stone and don't move, I'm not going to proceed on the journey. So if you see beliefs as stepping stones, be willing to take your foot off and move to the next stepping stone, a new understanding. So I thank you for your presence and your participation in today's Youth on the Mount. We plan to have the next broadcast on Sunday, August the 20th. I haven't a clue what the theme will be. It will emerge. So I'm deeply grateful that you are able to join us, or if you're watching the recording, that you've taken the time to watch the recording. And I wish each of us the bountiful blessings that are the riches of our soul. And may we distribute them to all whom we meet. And so from all of us here at Meditation Mount, we bid you a very good night. Blessings. Namaste.